Coming up with content for video games, I think is something you could genuinely never run out of ideas for, especially considering the roster of just top tier titles we've had over the years. I mean, it'd be pretty easy making videos about stuff like Half-Life 2, Doom, the GTA series, or Galgun 2. But weirdly, the games I find myself coming back to the most aren't the 8s, 9s, or 10s out of 10. They're the ones a little bit lower on the spectrum, the 6s or the 7s. You know exactly the kind of game I'm referring to. I don't have to name a specific title, but you're already thinking about it in your head. The kind of game that's good enough to keep playing, but just has those few flaws or shortcomings that stop it from being a masterpiece. The kind of thing you finish and then say to yourself, yeah, that was alright. But then also the kind of thing you probably played and beaten countless times. The thing is though, these shortcomings don't stop it from being playable, and in a lot of ways, it's part of what makes them so interesting. So I thought I'd go back and take a look at some of the most 7 out of 10 games of all time, and see how they still hold up, if they do at all. So join me as we step back into the world of perfectly acceptable mediocrity, and take a look at a bunch of games that almost hit the mark, but fell slightly short. Before we kick things off though, if you could maybe consider subscribing to the channel to kind of help me reach that 1 million sub mark, and then also maybe think about supporting me on Patreon if you enjoy the content and want to see more videos like this. Sound good? Right, let's get into it.
Where's your boss, bitch?
Right, so the first one up is 50 Cent Blood on the Sand, a third-person shooter developed by Swordfish Studios and released in 2009.
You see him fly, 50?
And a game which has next to nothing in common with the previous 50 Cent game, Bulletproof, outside of sharing the same protagonist, which is good because that game was utter shit. Anyway, the premise in Blood on the Sand is that you're playing as the man himself, traveling to a fictional Middle Eastern country to perform a concert with the G-Unit. Turns out though that the promoter for the event isn't able to pay them their whopping $10 million fee, which, as you'd expect, pisses our boy off. So instead, this guy gives them a priceless skull encrusted with diamonds as payment.
He covered it in diamonds when she died and kept it by his bedside.
Damn, look at that ice, man.
And it all seems fine until 50's ambushed by a group of mercenaries and his skull is stolen by a mysterious woman, forcing him to then wage war on the Middle East until he gets it back. With the rest of the story able to be summarized with the simple phrase of, "Where's my skull, bitch?"
That bitch has got my skull, and I want it back.
Yeah, that pretty much becomes the absolute focus from that point on, just a man in search of his diamond-encrusted skull, with Fiddy treating almost every single person he meets from that point on like a total arsehole.
Go on.
With, I believe, every single woman he interacts with being referred to as a bitch at least once.
You one lucky bitch, you know that? Where's my skull?
But hey, like, it makes sense, right? And won't somebody please help this man find his goddamn skull?
Where'd she go? That bitch took my skull.
Yeah, so obviously none of this is meant to be taken all that seriously, and it's really just the bare bones explanation for why things are happening. I mean, the background music is just 50 Cent's music looping constantly. There's a short stint where he has to help out an American mercenary named Carter to steal a bunch of gold.
Withdraw all funds.
Oh, I do my banking online.
But most of it is just one man against the entire country. Ignoring the lunacy of the plot though, beneath all of this is actually a pretty competent third-person shooter with some basic cover shooting mechanics. 50's a pretty able-bodied dude and he's able to use all manner of weapons.
Behold, my stuff.
With them all being broken down into categories like short range with submachine guns and shotguns, you got long range with assault rifles and machine guns, then heavy with grenade launchers and RPGs. Along with finally some trusty sidearms which all have infinite ammo. Someone ever gets too close, you can perform a melee takedown by timing these button prompts on the screen, and there's also a slow motion bullet time feature added in as well.
How you like?
You earn cash through kills along with destroying crates around the levels, and you try to rack up these combos by chaining enemy kills as much as you can, all to earn the highest possible score. You can even taunt your enemies to earn bonus points, unlocking different taunts as well.
Wish you never met me now, motherfucker.
Along with there being these constant challenges you get to complete on the fly, like killing a certain amount of enemies in a time limit. So it never just feels like you're shooting the same few enemies over and over without any kind of delineation. Even just putting all that cash to use and buying new weapons feels like it's giving the player a few more options, offering up alternate loadouts and strategies depending on what guns you roll with.
Try some of this shit.
I actually kind of found that the LMG, for instance, was almost boring in how effective it was given the huge magazine size and the damage output. So, just to mix things up, I swapped out to something with a smaller mag size like an SMG, and then tried to use grenades a bit more to keep things interesting. They do try to mix things up a bit further too there with this whole driving sequence where you're chasing after a convoy.
You have to catch up to the convoy.
And then later on, you're shooting at a bunch of people from a chopper.
Nice work.
Still though, try as they might, things do get pretty damn repetitive the more you play, because at the end of the day, you're still just really moving from room to room and shooting the same couple of people over and over. It's got that old thing of entering an area and seeing it full of waist-high cover and knowing that once you cross that invisible line, enemies are just gonna spawn out of nowhere to attack you, which they always do. There's only 3 boss fights in the game as well, and every single one of these is against a chopper, which you always have to shoot down with an RPG, which, yeah, is just kinda lazy.
Give it up. Go home and put this one down to experience.
This thing also runs on the Unreal Engine 3, which means it suffers from that typical Unreal Engine 3 texture streaming, most noticeable at the beginning of levels when things take a while to load in. But I think what I hate the most is the aiming acceleration, which honestly might be some of the worst I've ever seen, which is not helped either by the inconsistent frame rate, which is something, as far as I know, only happens on the PS3. I mean, as far as I've heard, the 360 version seems to be more stable, which is probably why that one is so goddamn expensive to buy.
Yeah, nice work, 50.
Regardless though, there's actually very little to fault with the overall gameplay loop, and it's also worth mentioning that it's clearly been designed with co-op play in mind, with frequent sections where 50 and one of the blokes from the G unit have to help each other out.
We need some teamwork over here.
And if you did play through this with a mate back in the day, well, I can't imagine you having anything but a cracking time with it. Looking back on this and trying to understand why it got lukewarm review scores isn't really all that difficult based off the whole premise, but the thing that I do find staggering is how apparently this only sold about 50,000 copies when it launched, which is just insane. I mean, yeah, like this thing is far from being any kind of masterpiece, but only selling 50,000 copies is kinda mind-boggling. I mean, it boggles the mind. I mean, that's just like a full-on commercial failure.
10 million, guaranteed. That's the deal.
Now, to be fair, 2009 was definitely one of those years when it comes to gaming. I mean, we had things like Modern Warfare 2, Uncharted 2, Arkham Asylum, and Assassin's Creed 2 to name but a few. And then in February alone, we had Killzone 2 and Street Fighter 4. So I don't know, like maybe it was just a case of people playing bigger and better things.
Knock that shit down so we can get out of here.
But I do think this is genuinely one of those diamond-encrusted skulls in the rough kind of titles. Yeah, not amazing or revolutionary in the slightest, but it just does what it does, and it does it well.
Good.
Plus, if nothing else, it does at least resolve the age-old question of, where's my goddamn skull, bitch?
Where's my skull?
Next up is 2006 Black, a first-person shooter developed by Criterion Games, known famously for their work on the awesome Burnout series, with this being their only foray into the FPS genre, and to be honest, a pretty damn good one. The story is that you're playing as a Black Ops soldier named Jack Keller, who's being interrogated in some kind of CIA black site about an operation that's gone awry, with each of the missions then being part of Keller's story told through flashbacks. All of which is very Call of Duty Black Ops, beating Treyarch to the punch here by a good 4 or so years. Don't expect any kind of interesting revelations or plot twists though, because Black's story is by and large kinda boring.
Lennox took them all out, single-handed. Everything changed after that.
So what else did she tell you?
I don't care!
And the sporadic editing style, using lots of extreme close-ups and distorted visual effects, barely masks what's otherwise a forgettable premise, a lot of which is unskippable. With the opening credits, for instance, being roughly 3 or so minutes of people's names popping up over a black screen with music in the background, which is just mind-numbingly dull to sit through. It's also kind of weird in how it seems to take itself so seriously, given the otherwise comical aspect to every other element. But that's okay, because the other facet of the gameplay, that being the shooting, is absolutely stellar, genuinely putting most other FPS games to shame. And the reason for that, which you're probably starting to notice if you didn't already know, is that the gunplay in Black is just ridiculously over the top. Criterion took the same approach with Black as they did with the Burnout series, taking the whole exaggerated destruction concept from racing and applied it to a first-person shooter, and the results speak for themselves. I mean, the amount of things you've got to shoot at here is just astounding, and almost every single prop in the world explodes in some elaborate way when you shoot it. The opening mission, for instance, lets you grab an RPG and destroy not one, but 2 separate buildings.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
And while this first mission is only about 5 or so minutes long, you could spend upwards of double that just going around blowing everything up.
Bravo here, I'm going in.
The second mission has you moving about in this giant forest, far surpassing that smaller size of the first one, letting you now shoot at these trucks that are parked all over the place, which may as well be full of nitroglycerin. Then the third mission has you dodging sniper fire in a graveyard before shortly returning the favour, finally ending up in the dubiously named Sniper's Alley, where yet again you can destroy more nearby buildings with an RPG. Followed by then what's probably the best mission in the game at a foundry, which is more or less just an explosion factory, blowing up giant vats yet again with a rocket launcher.
Very impressive.
And while a lot of it is for show, some of it also serves a tactical purpose, letting you blow open the side of buildings to create alternate routes. And then a mission in the Asylum has a bit where you can destroy weakened walls to avoid the line of sight of a machine gun. But even just like the sheer amount of particle effects when shooting things is really impressive, especially given that this was made for the dwindling PS2 and the Xbox. Even arguably beating out other games like Fear in that regard, which is obviously one of its major influences. And in fact, I think the only game that actually beats it is probably Trepang 2, which came out almost 2 decades later. So for a long while there, this thing arguably ruled the roost. Apparently the music is done by Michael Giacchino, who worked on, among a heap of other things, the Medal of Honor series. But the reason I say apparently is because you'd hardly even know that, because the real soundtrack in this game is the awesome sound design from all the weapons and explosions. And I mean, is there a more metal soundtrack than the sound of things exploding and people screaming in agony?
You got that straight.
Enemies are often super dramatic when they're killed too, falling backwards in a really exaggerated way. And if you kill someone on a walkway, they'll almost always topple over the nearby railing. It's just chock full of what kids these days refer to as hype moments. Short but memorable little sequences with high impact action. The mission inside the Asylum, for instance, has a short sequence in the showers that looks a hell of a lot like that famous scene from The Rock, which was also another memorable shootout in Modern Warfare 2. Yeah, again, beating Call of Duty here by like half a decade. It also helps that almost every weapon is super fun to use, with the shotguns in particular being a real standout. Not only do they blast doors off their hinges, but they more or less kill every enemy in a single hit. But then even smaller weapons like the submachine guns are great fun. The only thing it has going against it is the variety or the lack thereof. I mean, you're really only fighting the same couple of enemies over and over, and the only way that it ever tries to shake things up is by adding in dudes with heavy armor and shotguns who function the same but just have more health. And then later on, you'll also see these guys holding riot shields. There's only 8 missions all up as well here, and none of these are going to take you longer than 15 or 20 minutes to get through, where the only times it ever gets moderately challenging is during the last couple, because they just throw an insane amount of enemies at you at once. They do try to pad out the length a bit here by putting all these side objectives throughout each of the environments, but you don't have to find all of these to complete the mission. So all up, you could easily beat it in around 3 or 4 hours. The only other thing I would bitch about is this whole depth of field effect when you're reloading weapons, which I dislike mainly because it just prevents you from seeing what's happening. And I get that they've done this to try to be cinematic and all of that stuff, and yeah, to be fair, this was one of the first games I can ever remember that tried to do this effect. But if you're like me, after you shoot something, you like to reload. And the amount of times I did this out of reflex after shooting something explosive, only for that depth of field effect to essentially mask the results of my handiwork, was too many times to count. Overall, not a game-breaking issue, but I do wish they gave you the option to turn this off. Either way though, Black is still insanely fun while it lasts, and definitely one of those if you know kind of games. If it had come out earlier than 2006, it probably would have been a bit better received, but it's still without a doubt one of the best of its kind. And it proves that sometimes all you really need to make an FPS good is to just let the player blow up a whole bunch of shit. I mean, it's basically a GigaChat FPS that mogs every other shooter with its absurd gunplay, Sigma tier destruction, and pure aura farming. Just you look maxing your KD while buildings get absolutely ratioed. Did I say that right? Now, I feel like most of the first-party games that Sony have made in the last decade or so could be added to this video, but one of the best examples I reckon out of all of them has to be 2019's Days Gone. Developed by Ben Studio, the same guys who created the awesome Siphon Filter series, along with what's arguably their greatest work with Bubsy 3D. I mean, what other game lets you get 40 coordinate units per frame?
40 coordinate units per frame, going straight up.
Anyway, Days Gone takes place after a global pandemic that's more or less destroyed the world, all due to a mysterious virus that turns people into what's more or less zombies, though in-game they're referred to as freakers. And you're playing as Deacon St. John, a biker and former Special Forces soldier stranded out in the middle of Oregon. Just a simple man trying to make his way in the universe.
Alright. Here you go. Thanks, brother.
Deacon's haunted by the undetermined fate of his wife Sarah, who during the prologue was airlifted to safety out of the area, with Deacon's best buddy Boozer being the only companion he's now got left.
We'll head out in the morning, find some parts, and come back and get your bike.
And the both of them are just out here in the wild, trying to not get killed by the freakers, along with any number of these other hostile murderous factions out there vying for control. In typical Sony fashion, this thing has constant and lengthy cinematics, but I will say one thing, and that Sam Witwer, whose voice and likeness has been put into Deacon, does a pretty damn good job with the material.
No, I get it. Let me ask you a question. Why are you telling me this?
And in fact, to be honest, like, Witwer gives it his all in almost every single project the guy's ever done, from Starkiller through to Darth Maul. Even if I still picture him as the guy back in those early seasons of Dexter who pretended to be the ice truck killer.
The fuck are you?
Either way though, the way this dude portrays Deacon plays a big part in what makes the character so likable.
I really appreciate it.
And it is about the most Daryl from Walking Dead you can possibly get without it actually being Norman Reedus. Much like Daryl 2, Deacon's a biker, which means his primary mode of transportation is just that, a bike. And a big component to the overall progression is about upgrading this thing and restoring it over time to its former glory, after it's been broken down for parts in the prologue. Along with improving it, you also need to keep it topped up with fuel, adding a sense of urgency to exploring the map, given that having it towed back to a base can be pretty costly. I also really like the physics when driving this thing around. I mean, there's just such a great sense of weight to controlling the bike. And backing off the throttle when going down hills to preserve petrol also adds a bit of an interesting element to everything as well. Different kinds of terrain have different kinds of traction, and you can swap your tyres out to accommodate for all of that stuff too. So it's more than just being this generic vehicle you hop into to get from point A to B. Considering as well that the freakers can and often will tackle you and knock you off it if you're not careful. The thing is though, outside of that, it is pretty much just a standard zombie shoot-up / stealth game, all of which shares a lot of similarities with something like The Last of Us. Mostly in how the shooting feels, but also in the way you can seamlessly go from using ranged weapons into melee attacks. You've also got that same trajectory indicator when throwing grenades or molotovs, and you even get a similar hit marker to let you know when you've dealt a killing shot.
Is that it? Is that all you got?
So yeah, Molotov cocktails, bolt-action rifles, and melee weapons. Sound familiar? I think my favourite item here though is the smoke bomb, which has this amazing effect of causing enemies to stand completely still when they're hit by it, leaving them wide open to a takedown. I mean, heaven forbid these guys actually get out of the way and move. They'd much rather stand there and just make themselves an easy target. You've also got those stealth sections where you hide in waist-high grass, which somehow makes you invisible, which even by 2017 standards was starting to feel a bit dated. And then much like Daryl Dixon, Deacon's got a crossbow of his own, which is easily one of the best weapons in the game, along with a tacked on slow motion ability because, okay, why not? Now, that's not to say that any of this stuff isn't good, because it's quite the opposite, but it's just that almost every single aspect of this you will have seen before. I mean, you earn XP from kills and level up to unlock new upgrades, you earn cash from story and side missions, and you turn in bounties, and a map screen with about a dozen different icons to explore. Like I said, you've seen all this stuff before. I do like the way the infected are treated here though, and the lore behind them is at least kind of unique. For instance, in the way that they hang out in these animalistic nests that you can burn out with a Molotov, which is a pretty fresh take on the idea. Then there's also these little childlike zombies too, called newts, which are a bit more reluctant to attack, and instead prefer to hang back and just watch Deacon from a distance. Or yet, funnily enough, one of the most dangerous enemies in the game aren't even the Freakers. It's all these random wolves you get constantly ambushed by. I mean, these things often soak up more bullets than the zombies do, not to mention they're much faster. And I just stopped counting the amount of times that one of these things appeared out of nowhere to attack me. What is genuinely dangerous in this game, though, is when a large group of freakers gets together. And Days Gone has a unique take on that as well, in the way that it handles these hordes. With hordes being these huge groups of them that you'll often see moving across the map, with there even being a few preset areas that they hang out at, which you can clear out for XP. The most infamous one there being the sawmill, which has quite literally hundreds to deal with, and all of which require the absolute best guns and gear to take out properly. I mean, I think it's all but agreed upon that you need to have the best machine gun, along with some of the best explosives to even stand a chance, along with knowing the surrounding environment and how to best bottleneck them into specific spots.
We may be trapped.
Either way though, it's by far Days Gone's coolest feature, which is kinda weird that they chose to hide it about 10 or so hours into the story, which also really is the biggest problem this thing has.
I don't think he's gonna see it that way.
In just how fucking long the whole thing goes on for, which is again, classic Sony. I mean, the main story alone is going to take you anywhere from 30 to 40 hours to complete, with there being something like 160 missions all up. Now, to put it into perspective, in GTA 5 there was 69 main missions, and in Red Dead 2 there was about 104. And I think most people can agree that both those games were massive. But now consider they're still quite a ways off the 160 we've got in Days Gone. And I don't know, like I feel like the game could have been like half the length and probably been far better off. Does that make the whole thing bad? Well, no it doesn't, but a game being that needlessly long, just with all this pointless padding and superfluous shit, is kinda demotivating. Especially as I mentioned, where 90% of it is you just doing the same stuff you've already done before. Despite getting pretty average reviews when it first launched though, Days Gone did still apparently sell quite well, hitting around 9 or so million copies. Not enough to warrant a sequel though, which is a bit of a shame because I think a more refined second entry, removing some of the repetition and focusing in on the more unique elements, could have been really good. And it also would have given them a chance to get rid of some of those fucking wolves. Please. Now, if there's a better example of a more 7 out of 10 first-person shooter out there than Rage, well, I am yet to become aware of its existence. Released in 2011 and developed by the granddaddies of the genre, id Software, to say this thing had a polarizing reception is the understatement of the century. Again too, a game with a really interesting premise, set at a point in the far future after Earth's been hit by a massive asteroid, with the government back at the time putting a select group of citizens into cryosleep in these underground pods called arcs. And you're playing as someone who is in one of those arcs, woken up accidentally in this new era, with the world overrun with bandits and other horrible mutants, and the remaining survivors just trying to hunker down and do their best.
Those bandits shouldn't be too hard to take down. Not for you.
While a powerful military force, aptly named the Authority, tries to maintain control, with these guys also in search of your character due to their involvement in the Ark project.
Man, I hate the Authority.
And it's all very Mad Max inspired, with you playing as this silent, solitary wanderer, just going around from outpost to outpost and helping out whoever needs to be helped.
But you know the way it works here. We help you, you help us.
You'll interact with a diverse cast of characters here too, all of which have some incredibly lifelike animations and movements, also featuring what might be gaming's most famous midriff with Lusum Hagar.
Ready to give it a toss?
Stop it! It's turning me on!
Early missions involve things like clearing out bandit outposts or killing mutants, but then later on you get fully embroiled in all this drama surrounding the Authority, and you take these guys on almost exclusively, using some pretty creative looking weaponry along the way with futuristic guns, but then also rustic looking variants that seem like they're barely held together. You got a crossbow that could fit different ammo types, one being an electric bolt handy for zapping enemies standing in puddles of water. Yeah, what is this, Bioshock? Along with your trusty shotgun firing out explosive shells. Yeah, all very, very satisfying. One of the cooler weapons though was the wing stick, which was like a boomerang thing you could throw out that had the nice habit of homing in on someone's head and instantly killing them.
That's rad.
Then on top of that, you got the whole driving aspect as well, where you can modify and even race different vehicles to unlock new upgrades and improve them. Taking out other bandits, driving around the wasteland with your newfound gadgets, like you're in some kind of futuristic version of the Batmobile. So overall, you could really see the combination here of these newer mechanics, combined with id Software and their whole shooter DNA, with it also being the showcase for yet again another one of John Carmack's new gaming engines. And yeah, like, Rage was pretty unique at the time due to it using the brand new id Tech 5 with this whole mega texture gimmick. Compared to other games where you'd see textures reused over and over, the entire game would just have this one massive unique texture, which meant that every rock, piece of brick, or stone and road would look completely different.
Excited.
Which did work in that regard, and combined with these very handcrafted environments, it did mean that no two areas ever truly looked the same, which was handy for interior locations, so it didn't feel like copy-pasted rooms over and over. In fact, I reckon that underground subway hub is still one of the most visually interesting looking areas in, I don't know, any game.
You new in town?
But then the even larger opened up environments like the aptly named City of the Dead also looked pretty impressive. The issue at the time though was that it suffered from some pretty serious texture streaming, where you could quite literally just turn around and see everything having to load in. And while it did look good from afar, up close it looked far from good. And walk up to any object in the game and you'd notice how the textures were outright muddy and blurry. On top of that, it also ran like absolute shit. And I remember buying this on PC when it first launched, and things were so bad that I just gave up trying to get it to work and bought it on the PS3, which ironically was more optimized than the PC was.
Pleasure doing business with you.
Nowadays it has been patched and modded to the point that it's barely an issue, but yeah man, this engine back then was not renowned at all for being stable. The other thing that lets Rage down is that it really does start to get repetitive as there's little to no enemy variety. I mean, like I said, you start off shooting lots of bandits and mutants, and then by the end of the game, you're still just mostly shooting bandits and mutants. You got the Scorcher clan, the Ghost clan, along with the Gearheads, but they all pretty much require the same strategy to beat, that being just shooting them in the face until they drop dead. I mean, the Authority soldiers might offer up some slightly different approaches, and they can be more challenging, but as long as your finger's able to find that left mouse button, none of this is really an issue. Maxing out your vehicles also required some serious time spent in the racing mode, which wasn't hard, but there was a lot of them to get through. You'd usually break away from the pack very early on in the races as well, where it was just a matter of running the course for the next few minutes without crashing. And then repeat that for the 20 or so races it has all up, and there you go. And while there was a whole bunch of optional side missions out there to complete as well, pretty much all of these just sent you back to the same areas you've already played through for the story. Just kinda feels like id Software came up with 3 or 4 ideas and never really advanced it or developed it further than that. And it's story-driven, an open-world shooter, and vehicular combat, but never really settling into any of these. It's like the old saying, jack of all trades, master of none.
Funny, huh?
Still though, like a pretty interesting turning point for the company, before these guys came back in 2016 and absolutely kicked ass all over again, with a lesser known title that few people even remember. Oh yeah, and if we want to talk about another classic example of a 7 out of 10 game, we could also bring up the sequel, Rage 2, but I think it's better off if we keep things moving along. With the next one on the list being 2009's Star Wars Force Unleashed, developed by LucasArts. From a time too when the franchise wasn't completely oversaturated with utter slop, when you could still say you're a fan of the series and people would still look at you as if you were a complete dork.
We've just embraced the power of the dark side.
Now, this is something where I can't think of any other game that I both love and hate to such a degree. Like, I really love so many aspects of this thing. I love the story and how it's interwoven with all the characters and the events in the movies. And I love how you get to play as this stupidly powerful Jedi who's basically just Vader's attack dog. I mean, the clue's in the name. Force Unleashed. You're brutal, overpowered, and unhinged, and it's all deliberate. But then I really hate some of the creative choices in the game, especially with some of the enemy designs, the overuse of button prompts, and some of the terribly designed levels and boss fights. In fact, I remember playing this on my PS3 back in the day and raging so much during that Junk Planet level that our neighbor at the time knocked on the front door because they thought that I was getting into some sort of a domestic fight. It's kind of wild looking back on this thing too, considering at one point it was also considered canon. But now, of course, it's about as canon as Kylo Ren being on Undercover Boss.
Yes.
The premise here is again really interesting, taking place between the events in episode 3 and 4, at a point when the Empire is just tightening its grip on the galaxy. Opening with a really cool prologue sequence set on Kashyyyk, where you get to briefly play as Darth Vader, walking around in what's more or less God mode and bullying a bunch of Wookiees. Good. The real target though is a Jedi named Kento Marek, who's hiding out on the planet. And after finding the guy and getting in a brief duel, Vader gets the high ground and kills him, all in front of his defenseless son Galen in a moment that's genuinely heartbreaking.
A son?
Run!
With Vader then taking the poor kid under his wing, training him up to become a powerful Jedi in his own right and renaming him to Starkiller.
At last, the dark side is your ally.
All to be used as a bit of an ace in the hole for his eventual plans to overthrow the Emperor.
Yes, only together can we defeat him.
Or at least so he says, because famously this guy likes to lie a whole lot.
You agreed to stay away!
I lied.
Yes, definitely Vader portrayed in one of his more sinister and evil roles, and there's absolutely no shred of decency or any indication about his redemption at this stage in the character's arc.
I lied.
He uses Galen because he's an efficient weapon that can work covertly without being detected, killing both Imperial and Resistance forces alike.
The Emperor's spies watch my every move. We must provide them with a distraction.
And for a while there, he's just sent off to carry out all these missions under Vader's orders, mostly hunting down other Jedi, with one in particular, Ram Koda, being crucial to Galen's redemption.
Vader thinks he's turned you, but I can sense your future.
Because yeah, as it turns out, Vader's about as trustworthy as a cock ring made out of cellophane.
I lied.
And early on there, Galen starts to rethink this whole ideology because of it, with him then working with what would eventually come to be the Rebel Alliance, even being the direct inspiration for starting it, with familiar faces like Princess Leia, Mon Mothma, and Jimmy Smits.
Why are you keeping me here, Maris?
Assisted by his droid companion Proxy and pilot/gal pal Juno, who's just distractingly attractive.
Is there a psychological profile in there too?
Master, I can tell you she's going to be impossible to reprogram.
Did he really say that?
Visiting planets like Bespin, Kashyyyk, Hoth, and Felucia. Yeah, bye Felucia.
Bye, Felicia.
Also being one of those examples of an art style aging pretty gracefully, because while this might be like a 17-year-old something title, it's hard to deny just how gorgeous some of these environments still look artistically. Also having some of the best looking glass smashing physics ever. Plus, they even found a way to work in a level that looks like it's set inside your mum. Along with some of these character designs, which are just peak 7th generation stuff, especially with Juno's whole appearance.
Of course.
And even Galen himself is the typical shaved head edgy protagonist that just permeated the industry back then. Portrayed again by Sam Witwer, who again goes all out and makes a character with a name like Starkiller far more complex and interesting than they should be.
Wait. Father, no!
Thankfully too, this guy does bear the fruit of Vader's labor, being a pretty damn powerful Jedi, able to put that lightsaber to good use and also wield the Force with a lot of competency. To the point of the whole thing being just outright ludicrous, with there being a very good reason why they prevented this guy from being a canon character. I mean, to put it into perspective, this guy's able to beat both Vader and Palpatine in one-on-one fights. I mean, yeah, like this shit is Power Fantasy 101 kind of stuff. With returning favourites like Force Push, Force Grip, and Lightning all playing key roles in the gameplay. There's a whole heap of unlockable combat combos in here too, from things like powering up your lightsaber with lightning, to launching enemies upwards for some air juggling, or just simple grapple and takedown moves. All of which use a simple combination of either light or heavy attacks, combined with different force moves. And all of which come in handy given that the tougher enemies are otherwise able to block or outright avoid some of these moves. It's definitely got that mid to late 2000s button mash and jank to it at times, and it is easy to just kind of get lost in there pressing the attack button over and over. But if you do take the time to learn some of the basic combos, it does drastically improve things overall. There's a point to all of this as well, because getting more stylish kills earns you extra XP, or going ahead to that next level up, which can then be spent on unlocking those extra abilities and buffs. This was also the era where physics were really playing a huge part in video games, and this might be one of the best examples of it as well. In the way that you can pick up almost every single prop that's not nailed down, and throw it around here with the Force, enemies included. Oh yeah, and in fact, Force Unleashed is one of the few games that's not a GTA game to use that Euphoria physics engine. Which was, and still is pretty damn awesome, in the way that it causes enemies to react to what's happening to them dynamically. Fire. Like pick up a stormtrooper off the ground for instance, and you'll see the guy wiggle his legs around, and if he's near a railing, he'll even grab on so he doesn't fall off. You can grab enemies and throw them into laser shields, vaporizing them instantly, and in one level you can smash the windows, causing everyone to get sucked out into space.
That's awesome!
All the kind of stuff that really played a big part in making you feel like this overpowered, unstoppable force of nature. Even just something as simple as pushing back those giant metal doors felt really satisfying. The way you could bend like 10-inch thick steel with your force abilities.
Yes!
It's just that the controls struggled quite a bit at times there, and simply locking onto the one enemy you wanted to grab could often be really tricky. Not to mention, it's one of the worst offenders when it comes to video game cameras undermining your progress. It suffered later on in the story as well because it relied really heavily on these lame and spongy enemies to increase the difficulty, which it would then just copy and paste ad nauseum. Like these purge troopers who are these big armored assholes that can fire off missiles and are also resistant to a lot of your attacks, where you pretty much just have to use the same boring strategies over and over to beat them effectively. Oh yeah, not to mention the countless amount of times you had to take on a Rancor or an AT-ST, always ending in that same tedious button prompt sequence, which was cool like the first time you did it, but then quickly got boring as piss. In fact, pretty much every single mini-boss enemy used this approach. The actual bosses almost always ended in one of these sequences too, which is just kind of irritating. When you spend all of this time trying to find the right combos and the moves to use against them, all to be forced into some kind of shitty button prompt all over again. But the real fuck up this thing had is what's arguably one of the worst video game sequences of all time. Yeah dog, that infamous level where you need to pull the Star Destroyer out of orbit, all while constantly respawning TIE fighters keep appearing to disrupt the process and shoot at you. And I don't know, like, I simply can't put it into words just how bad this is through footage or explanation alone. It's just the kind of thing you really have to experience firsthand to see how crappy it is.
What is going on here?
And there's actually a big reason as to why I prefer the PS2 version to this one, simply because they had the good sense to cut that sequence out entirely there. The worst level overall though, I'd say is the last one set on the Death Star, because you'd think that this would let you revisit some familiar looking halls and corridors, right? But then most of it is spent dodging this constantly firing laser beam inside the Death Star's bowels, They do kind of redeem it a bit for the final fight against Vader though, which is just fucking awesome, seeing Galen literally cut the dude apart. But then of course they stuff it up for the final fight against the Emperor, assuming you go that route, which on the higher difficulties is one of the cruelest boss fights of all time. I mean, it is what you'd kind of expect for an encounter against the toughest Sith in the galaxy and all that, but goddamn dude, this guy is a massive prick, throwing around electrified objects and zapping you with lightning. Now, if you time your block right, you can actually deflect the lightning back at him, and also use Force Repulse to knock away all those objects, but chances are you're not going to know how to do this for your first playthrough.
Deal with the boy.
All up, it's not a super long game either, coming in at around like 5 or 6 hours, but as the saying goes, the brightest star burns the fastest. And they do throw so much shit at you in those 5 or 6 hours that I can't even imagine where else they could have taken it given more time. So, while it's definitely got issues, overall, it is a fun experiment at seeing what it would be like to let the player experience the Star Wars universe as a stupidly overpowered Jedi. And I gotta say that I much prefer it to that slower and more methodical stuff we got in the Jedi Survivor games. And I know that a lot of people like them and find them amazing, and I find them amazing too, simply for the fact that these games somehow found a way to make Force abilities and lightsaber combat seem lame. Oh yeah, and the DLC for this is also kind of awesome, with a couple of these what-if missions. If Starkiller had actually sided with the Emperor and replaced Vader. Like the one here where you go to Hoth during the events of The Empire Strikes Back to fight Luke, even turning the guy to the dark side and making him your apprentice. Then there's another one on Tatooine tracking down C-3PO and R2-D2, where you make your way through Jabba's palace to take on a Rancor, you have a fight against Boba Fett, and then another one against Obi-Wan. Even throwing the bloke into the exhaust of the Millennium Falcon. You got Jawas, Sand People, Wampas, and Gamorreans, and it's pure power fantasy, schlocky type stuff. Even starting you off with every single skill and ability maxed out, so you really just go through the whole thing tearing ass.
Good.
They made a sequel as well, which did improve some stuff, I guess. I mean, like, it streamlined the combos and added in some new moves, like being able to deflect back projectiles along with the whole Jedi mind trick.
You will shoot your friends.
I will shoot my friend.
Picking enemies up and throwing them around is a whole lot better too, and you can even zap an object with lightning and throw it now to do more damage. And visually too, it looks stunning, with the lightning in particular now having this really gnarly looking effect. Instead of learning from their mistakes in the first game though, in regards to all the lame and spongy mini-boss type enemies, here though it's instead like they've doubled down, making you fight even more of them. With this new enemy that's got a giant shield and a cryo gun, along with another variant that's got a flamethrower. And you'll just fight so many of these dickbags throughout the story, always ending in that same lame QuickTime event. Yeah, speaking of lame, there's the premise, which is about the laziest thing they could have come up with to explain how Galen came back. With the premise that he's now a clone of the one from before. Yeah, a clone that just happens to conveniently have all the same memories and ideologies.
Proxy? Master? I thought you were dead.
You also visit far fewer destinations, with only 4 all up here. That is, if you even consider Dagobah to be your destination. Given about the only purpose it seems to serve is for a cinematic with Yoda.
You guard this place?
Plus, they even managed to outdo the tediousness of the Star Destroyer sequence by adding in what's one of the worst boss fights ever, against the Garog.
Give his hand a shove!
Which has like 5 different phases and goes on for like 20 minutes. And considering the game only lasts about 3 or so hours, that is a huge chunk there to spend on something so mundane. Still though, all up, The Force Unleashed as a series apparently sold over 10 million copies, and the first game alone sold over 7. Yeah, kind of ironic given the whole 7 out of 10 theme to the video. Know what I'm saying? And while it might not be held in such high regard as other classics like the Jedi Outcast series, it's still definitely got its fans, problems and all.
A symbol of hope.
Yeah!
Which does bring me finally onto the last game in the list with The Order 1886, developed by Ready at Dawn and released exclusively for the PS4 in 2015. And I will admit that I am kind of cheating on this one because aggregate score-wise, it's actually in the 60s and not the 70s. But I think it's the perfect example of a 7 out of 10 game. The kind of thing you're able to play through from start to finish, have a mostly good experience, and then just move on with the rest of your life.
I do not have time for games.
Part of what I reckon also makes this one so interesting is that again, it has a genuinely cool premise. Set in an alternate history London in the late 1800s, at a point where humans have secretly been fighting this centuries-old war against lichens or werewolves. The Order in the title refers to the group tasked with protecting humanity from this threat, with all of these members having lineage back to the original Knights of the Round, and even assuming some of their names.
Everything to your liking thus far?
You're playing as one of these members, a knight called Galahad, though as far as I could tell, it's never explicitly stated if you're playing as the Galahad or just someone who's taken on the title.
I am apprehensive of my responsibility in this affair.
Given that all the various members have survived for centuries by drinking this mysterious substance called Blackwater, which can heal all their wounds and extend their life, it is possible that you're the OG. But my point though is that the game never outright says it. Either way though, it's a pretty interesting and captivating story, with the Order trying to stop a group of rebels in London who are trying to assassinate some of the city's elite.
Remember, we are entering rebel territory. The insurgents will take umbrage at our incursion into Whitechapel.
For reasons which become more explained throughout the story, making for some great revelations in the final act of the game, with it having a really neat way of interpreting classic monsters like werewolves and vampires, and even a different take on the mystery surrounding Jack the Ripper and all the Whitechapel murders. Along with it being one of the few games I can think of that lets you see a man's flaccid penis. Galahad goes through a whole lot throughout the story too, as do some of the supporting characters, especially Lafayette, who not only has the dubious task of having to defend humanity from evil, but also that unfortunate predicament of being French.
I am a lover of liberty, mon ami.
He's a bit of a comic relief character that presents a lighter, more whimsical side to the Order and is constantly trying to hit on every able-bodied female. Contrasted with someone like Isabeau, who represents the strict and more rules-driven attitude that the Order has, making for some interesting back and forths as Galahad's all in the middle of it.
You heard Commissioner Doyle, it's a police investigation now.
Knights do not relinquish their authority to bureaucrats.
I will admit though, I am a bit of a sucker for this kind of alternate history stuff, which is probably too why I enjoy so many of the Assassin's Creed games. I mean, you've even got Nikola Tesla appearing in the game as well as a young bloke making guns and other gear for the Order, which is kind of like seeing Da Vinci make stuff for Ezio in the Assassin's Creed games.
This is for you as well.
It's the gameplay though where it starts to lose its way, not because it's bad, but because it does seem like the Order can't find a good balance between the gameplay and the cinematics. The prologue, for instance, is just incredibly boring, with it being a good 20 or so minutes before you even start to shoot things. Starting off with this whole sequence in media res, where Galahad's escaping from some kind of a prison, limping from room to room in super drawn out fashion. And I just want to say that I think when video games force you to play as someone who's physically injured and unable to move at a normal speed, well, it's about as fun as plucking at the hairs on your asshole with a rusty pair of pliers. Even after all of that as well, where the first chapter finally kicks off, it still forces you to walk around at a painfully slow pace.
But that section of the city is off limits.
But why?
Before finally you can actually shoot something, where we find yet again another really competent third-person shooter, with Galahad swapping out the long swords and the lances for carbine rifles, shotguns and grenades. And yeah, like it's nothing amazing, but the variety with the weapons along with the fantastic sound design and the gorgeous backdrops really does make for some compelling combat sequences. You can pop into cover easily, along with being able to blind fire to keep approaching enemies at bay, and get close enough to someone and Galahad can take them out with one of his fancy melee moves. Plus, enemies always conveniently stand around those red explosive barrels just begging to be shot at. Earn enough kills and you can charge up a sort of a bullet time power called Black Sight. We can fire quickly at all enemies in range with his sidearm, which is pretty rad too. And some of the weapons are pretty clever in concept as well, like this thermite machine gun, which fires out flammable dust with the alt fire launching out a flare that then ignites it. Even the Order's stock assault rifle has got a handy alt fire that stuns enemies. Plus, there's some really good revolvers in here as well, making your sidearms actually kinda useful. Along with some of Tesla's weapons, like one that needs to charge up for each shot and has a nice tendency to zero in on the nearest enemy. But by far the best weapon in the game is the coach gun. This triple barrel beast that is just a force of nature. To the point that it outright removes limbs from enemies when they're hit by it, often causing them to gurgle on their own blood in the process. What goes around comes around though, and enemies armed with this thing are also suitably dangerous, often also being covered in heavy body armor. And I don't know, like, it's just this cool mix of semi-historical stuff combined with all the made-up and science fiction weaponry, creating this really unique blend for combat. Most of which is pretty manageable without being too tough, aside from the final chapter, which just has an absurd amount of enemies to get through. Though yes, in its defense, it is the last part of the game, so you would expect it to be that hard. Every now and then they try to mix things up a bit by having you take on a Lycan, which almost always seems to take place in some kind of a storage area full of shelves, and almost always seem to attack you in groups of 3, where it also just becomes obvious that someone played through those similar sections in Dead Space 2 against the Stalkers and wanted to recreate that same feeling. Then there's a few areas where you need to stay hidden, crouch walking around, and stabbing people in the neck with the kind of knife that'll put Crocodile Dundees to shame.
That's a knife.
Then you've also got a lockpicking minigame, some basic platforming elements, and environmental puzzles to figure out too. The only problem with all of this is that every time you start to find a good rhythm with this stuff is usually when it switches gears again, and has you back to slowly walking around or watching yet another cutscene. Where it's like it's gone from an early Zack Snyder action movie to an episode of Yes Minister, where everyone's sitting around the round table discussing politics.
Sir Percival has cause, Lord Chancellor. The situation in Whitechapel may need to be addressed.
Does Lord Darwin speak with the blessing of the peers?
Boring! Now, to put into perspective, most long play videos on YouTube indicate that the game overall takes about 4 or 5 hours to get through. But now consider that most cinematic-only compilations go for about 3 to 3.5 hours, which means that, 75% of the game is taken up by cinematics. Annoyingly too, you can't afford to not pay attention during these because a lot of them have button prompts that you're required to do, or else you're going to die and have to restart, which often happens so quickly that if you turn away for like a split second, you're going to miss it. And even after that, it is kind of shocking how often they just rely on this gimmick for major moments in the game. None of which is all that fun either, man. I mean, this shit was played out back when Resident Evil 5 came out in 2009, let alone now in 2015.
I've had enough of your bullshit!
Even the final boss fight is more or less just a glorified QuickTime event, which is even lazier because it outright recycles the same format from a fight you had earlier on. It's also got that typical Sony style of gameplay, if you can call it that, where you've just got 2 people slowly walking around an empty environment, helping to hoist each other up over ledges and bantering back and forth to fill in the dead air. Yeah, where have I seen that before?
Assist me to get up there.
Yeah. Come on. See what you can find up there. You got it.
They're the same picture.
But you know what? When you keep in mind that this game was made by former Naughty Dog devs, well, that starts to make even more sense. A big point of criticism this thing had when it launched was also this forced widescreen effect, which I remember the developers claimed was to keep the whole thing looking and feeling cinematic. When, in reality, oops, there goes gravity, is probably just done because, like so many other titles at the time, it couldn't actually support 60 FPS. Not that it really matters though, because it does at least keep things stable, and either way, I still think the game looks phenomenal. Even more so when you consider that this is from 2015. I feel like I've made that argument countless times, how gaming graphics really peaked back in like 2015 and never really evolved from that point on. And I think The Order is a perfect example of that. I mean, this game could almost pass itself off as something coming out in 2026. It really does look that good at times. Though if I can do one thing, I would like to just point out the inconsistency of the technology in the game world. I mean, like, things are so advanced here that you got portable radios that people carry around on their shoulders. There's air support blimps that can drop down sonar bombs. But for some reason, no one's invented a flashlight you can wear on your shoulder. And every time you venture somewhere dark here, you've instead got to walk around holding a giant lantern like an absolute Philistine. I mean, you're playing as characters taking on the literal underworld, and no one's come up with a basic flashlight by now.
Proceed with caution.
Still though, I'd say the biggest fault this one has is that once you've beaten it, you really don't ever need to play it again. It relies on some pretty big revelations towards the end there, and once you know these are coming, I just can't imagine how it'd be that interesting to sit through them again. Literally sit through them, because you can't skip the cutscenes. It also ends on a bit of a cliffhanger with a really awesome post-credit scene that acts like the story's going to keep going, but yeah, as we know, that's never going to be the case.
And don't you know, I'm Galahad, no more.
Overall though, I think it deserves a place on this list, simply because I can't think of any other game that's quite like it. I mean, this whole alternate history, secret societies and advanced technology thing, combined with traditional horror monsters, really never has been done before. I mean, maybe Bloodborne is kinda similar thematically, but even then, that's a bit of a stretch. And I don't know, but I do think that 60 aggregate review score is maybe a little bit low, given the overall competency the whole thing has. Just a shame they seem to forget at times they were making a game and not an interactive movie. But hey, like if nothing else, it's still going to go down in history as the only PS4 game to feature full frontal male nudity. So that's something.
More than sufficient, I'd say.
By the way though, that about brings us to the end of this video. A video that took way longer than I thought it would. Once again, I'm sure there's about a bazillion games that I could have talked about in the list, so yeah, make sure to let me know in the comments which ones you think I could have brought up. And also too, if you've had any experiences playing through any of these titles that I did talk about, well, yeah, don't be shy to share. As always, thanks for watching.
I lied.
Thank you.